Powers,
Present.
Mayor Schneider,
Present.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Present.
Mr. Hockney,
Here.
Mr. Sewer.
A couple of items to modify on our agenda. That would be the removal of item B, election of chair and vice chairs. We've already done that this year. The addition of new business, we'll place that at item E. Change old business to F. And change the adjournment to G. The new business is Mr. Tim Gary to discuss a proposed change to the zoning ordinance.
Mr. Tim Gary.
I have a motion to modify the agenda as stated.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Mrs. Talmadge, please call the roll.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney.
Yes.
Okay, the agenda is so modified. Next item, approval of minutes. Do you have any changes to the minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes as prepared?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Mrs. Talmadge, please call the roll.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
I'll abstain.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney.
Yes.
Moves us along to item D, public hearing, zoning ordinance map amendment. Sir, would you please state your name?
Tiwi Marira?
Tiwi Maria.
Yes, sir. Is this mic on?
Yes, it is.
Tiwi Marira, owner of the 10-unit apartment building, 4431 Allison Street, located within the R2 one-family and two-family residence zoning district. Mr. Marira is requesting a zoning map change for the 50 by 158.22-foot lot of record from R2 to R3 multifamily zoning district. Objective is for the building to be a conforming use within its zoning district. If the commission endorses this request, it will then be forwarded on to council for a subsequent public hearing and possible removal. I'll first offer an option for anyone to speak in favor. So if you would please state your name again.
Hi there. My name is Tiwi Marira.
And proceed to make any statements you'd like to make on the subject.
Okay. Well, I've owned this building for about a year on the corner of Allison and Mills. I've been using a lot of my own funds to renovate the property. I think we've done a decent job. I have a few pictures here that I'd like to share with the committee, if that's okay. Recently, Mark Reeves, the inspector, came through. He looked at every single unit. He gave us a certificate of occupancy. And now that I've kind of spent all my money renovating the property, there's still lots of work to do. And so I think at this point, the only way I can finish the windows, resurfacing the parking lot, the first level balconies, some electrical upgrades, repainting the building, is if I refinance the property to pull some of that equity out and finish these repairs. And I did that. I had a loan scheduled with Fannie Mae, and I think about 3 days before we were going to close, they brought up the zoning issue. A zoning consultant informed us that it's a legal non-conforming use, and so they're not going to do the loan, and so that can kind of depend on the bank you have. So I'm working with another bank who has less of an issue over the zoning. I think the specific complaint is that section 1123.02B of the Norwood zoning code says that if the property is destroyed by an act of God, then you can only rebuild it back as a single family or a duplex, and that's scaring a lot of lenders. So I'm working with another lender, but in the future, I would like to have this zoned, say, legally conforming use for an R3, in an R3 zone, just so that if I ever sell or need to refinance again, this won't be an issue that's brought up by the next bank or purchaser of the building. So that is why I'm asking for the change to the zoning map so that I can finish this refinance and reinvest that back into the property. Yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Maria? Seeing none. Thank you, sir. Offer an opportunity for anyone to speak in opposition. Seeing none. Open the floor to discussion by the commission.
I'd like to hear Mr. Skelly's comments on it. He put together a nice white page on it to get us all up to speed on some of the zoning that was going on. Mr. Skelly, you have some comments for the commission?
Sure. So I provided to the Planning Commission a memo dated April 26, and it kind of outlines both the typical thought process the Planning Commission could use in terms of reviewing this request and kind of the factual basis and history for the property. So it's definitely a bit of an oddity in relation to the entire block. The city doesn't have a current comp plan, but the 1969 plan did recognize this building as a higher density unit within the rest of the single family and duplex block. Nevertheless, when it came towards working on the zoning, and I believe the current zoning ordinance that we have is 1985, they looked at the prevalent structure type, housing type, and at least, I believe I counted 16 of the structures are single family and duplexes, and obviously your property is the only multifamily. So with regards to what was the future intention or kind of latitude afforded to this, I think the city's position was they wanted to keep it as low density. Definitely, I appreciate your concerns with regards to the financing issue. I've heard that many, many times. And you're right, it just depends on the level of experience of the bank or whoever's providing the loan. Some people, they do have concern with regards to that. A lot of them are willing to recognize that and still go through. And internal to that, the city does have the ability, when, if there's an issue, to have the property owner applicant go through the Board of Zoning Appeals to request some sort of relief, and that's always a right offer to you. But to me, I did not find any, at least, compelling land use or policy reason as to making the change as to how it would assist the city long-term, aside from definitely understanding your need and, I guess, frustration. On that aspect alone, from a practical standpoint, if something would happen, definitely you'd be restricted from rebuilding, but I would still say our Board of Zoning Appeals would be reasonably flexible to work with you. So I don't think you changing it or for this particular property would be detrimental to the city, but it ultimately, I just didn't really find any kind of beneficial aspect to the city with regards to changing it from R2 to R3.
All right.
So,
Oh, sorry. Come back. May I do follow-up?
yes.
I understand the part of the refinancing and what you're trying to do with it to continue to the improvements. That makes perfect sense to me. I don't think that every zoning change that we make is going to have a positive impact for the city or a detrimental impact to the city. I would hope that it does not. Most of the time, the zoning stuff that we're putting in place is to plan for the future and moving forward. It says that this building's 120 years old. This building's 120 years old?
I've noticed that when they're this old on the auditor site, they just write 1900 as a placeholder, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's early 1900s.
This is 109. The building right around the corner is 109 years old, so it could be 120 years old, I guess. I mean, that would make sense. I don't have any other questions. I don't have a big concern with changing it. It's being used this way and been used this way for so many years, and putting the right zoning on it to help with the refinance of it so that you can continue to make improvements is a big part of it. So, those would be my only comments.
Other comments?
I appreciate the work you've put into this. It's beautiful. It
Thank
looks
you.
really nice, the photos we're seeing. And I think that I would love to have other landlords doing the kind of improvements you're doing in the city of Norwood.
As I looked at this, I wanted to see what would be the expanded use that would change from an R2 to an R3. And so the multifamily is what already exists there, so in that sense, it's not an expansion. The other items that you can do in the R3 districts that you can't do in the R2 district would be hotels, boarding and lodging houses, fraternity and sorority houses, dormitories, university-approved residences for students, faculty, and staff, and day nursery or daycare centers. So it is a somewhat more intensive use. It's still going from one residential use to another. It's not as big a jump as going from a residential to an office or an industrial use. And, I also would recognize that it is adjacent to an R3. So R3 exists along the opposite side of that street and down into that neighborhood for quite a distance. So I don't see that there's an enormous impact to the neighborhood from making that change. And I think it's worth pointing out that while it is changing a zone on one parcel, it's a parcel that's adjacent to an R3 zone already. So, I don't have big concerns about making this change either, although it is a somewhat expanded use. Any other comments? Be happy to entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion, that the Planning Commission recommends a zoning ordinance map change for 4431 Allison Street be endorsed. And I don't see any additional
I think that's right.
conditions to place on it.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Good job. I know, she stole my thunder.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney.
Yes.
Okay. So the motion is to endorse it to council. The Planning Commission will send a letter to council, and then they will hold a public hearing also that you should be notified about. Okay?
And then I come back to the second hearing.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the time and the effort this took in your consideration.
Thank you.
Mr. Skelly?
I guess through the chair, if I could just ask that the applicant does receive the correspondence both from Dana and myself, so he has the full package when he goes towards council.
Absolutely.
So if you want to either pick it up from Carrie, or if you have a business card, we could email it to you, whatever works. So.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
We'll now close our public hearing. Move on to new business. Mr. Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you is a memorandum from me to the Planning Commission suggesting changes to the Norwood Codified Ordinance Section 115141, which we've sort of recaptioned adaptive commercial reuses in residential zoning districts. This is, the base ordinance was passed in 2013, and that was to allow designed stores to be reused as commercial with possible residential upstairs. And this proposed change to the ordinance would allow some limited commercial uses of property at these church buildings that are no longer seem to be thriving as church buildings. The thing that prompted this was a visit by a fellow who's the managing director of Benchmark Wealth Management named David Eltringham. And he apparently toured the Korean Methodist Church with an eye toward the possibility of it being a headquarters for his company's financial planning services to, higher net worth individuals and professional athletes and whatnot. I think the Benchmark Wealth Management may be a nod to Johnny Bench, who I think is one of his clients. Okay. Mr. Skelly has recommended some changes to that section, 115141. I took those changes and I added changes using church, for church buildings, including Sunday school, the church itself, and any kind of parsonage that was on the site. And I hope that the court or that the commission would consider recommending this change. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Mr. Skelly and I have been kind of knocking this back and forth over the last day or so. The meeting was last week, I think, the tour. And I just thought we should have, whether this is suitable for this company or not, we should have some creative uses for the legacy churches going forward. Because there's some wonderful buildings and wonderful lots, and they don't seem to be in much demand some of them don't seem to be in much demand as churches.
Any questions for Mr. Gary? Mike, would you opine for us how this blends into the effort that you've been making to make some improvements on that corner store ordinance?
Sure, yeah, so there has been some discussion about section 115141. The current zoning ordinance that they're working on hasn't broached it yet, but to add to what was just discussed, so we, I guess, are fortunate to have this policy already in our ordinance. It's been there for a good, decade. I think it probably has been met with a decent amount of success. I've seen a couple properties go through it that would otherwise kind of languish and just not contributed to the city's tax base. Mr. Gary brings up a good point that while it serves a purpose for these ones that were former grocery stores, or they could have been, corner pubs or whatever, there's definitely a trend now for what's happening to churches, and even also schools. We saw with regards to the health and schools that they were now dealing with. So, and I think Monday there was a report on local media with regards to churches that are closing. So, having this option in the zoning ordinance where it provides latitude for investors to take over these properties, I think it's definitely a good idea. And it's just a matter as to, do we build on the existing policy that we have, or is it worth kind of taking a whole cloth report approach and taking something new? That's debatable, but I think it's probably a good idea, both from a land use planning and just from economic development, where rather than, like I said, have these properties sit there, start encountering property maintenance issues and other issues, vandalism, whatever, it provides that flexibility. So.
Yes.
But we haven't seen that in our communities. I mean, the Nazarene Church sat vacant for a very short period of time and is a thriving congregation again. Immaculate Conception, which used to be St. Matthew's, was never actually vacant. The Presbyterian Church on Floral Avenue has an absolute thriving congregation. And I think if we're using congregations of churchgoers as a reason to do this, I would disagree even with the Korean Methodist Church has not sat there a long time vacant. They were holding services in there not too long ago. So I don't know that I would agree that we have a challenge with churches that go vacant and sit and become blighted and become a problem. I think this potentially opens the door up for churches that are in place now for saying, wow, my property's a lot more valuable to a commercial entity to try to sell it and maybe bonus out on what they're doing, which we've seen churches. We saw that on the old Twin Drive-In site. When the church got a hold of that, they ended up selling it and making a ton of money and then building a new congregation. So I don't know that this doesn't open the door up for some other type of it's the society and the world we live in, where if a company came in and said, I'll give you this much money to move out of the church so that we can put our business in there. A church in my neighborhood is much different than a commercial entity in my neighborhood. So I look at this and say, I'm not sure this is the best way to go. I'm not saying it's not, but I don't feel like we have the issue with churches that it seems like this is being written and talked about more.
Mrs. Sickinger?
I had the opportunity to go through the church with David because the church is catty corner from my house. And the membership at that church has dwindled. I see it every single Sunday. And they used to have a pretty decent, about 4 years ago, they had a decent amount of people attending Mass there. They've since moved north. But when I went through the building, some of the things I saw were unbelievable. It's been very neglected. He had a contractor go through and take a look at it also, David did also. And it's going to be about $500,000 to get that building up to where it needs to be. It needs new boiler. It doesn't have heating AC. It's been flooding. The upstairs, the sanctuary is beautiful. It's very pretty. But again, the roof needs to be replaced. There's so much work that needs to be done there. So I do understand what Mayor Schneider is saying. I understand that the church is pretty small. The sanctuary is small. Underneath is massive. It's really big, and that's where the damage really is. So for another church to go in there, I don't know if we would be able to get another parish to go in there. I don't know if they call it other religions. I'm Catholic. I don't know if they would get another congregation in there, knowing right out of the gate that it's going to be that kind of money to get it up to where it needs to be. You can see mold. You can smell the mold. It needs work.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
But this proposed change is not saying that Benchmark Wealth Management is going in there. They haven't made the discussion. This is a change that the city is making as a proactive move to circumvent potential problems in the future. Right? Benchmark has not said, they've not put an offer in to buy that property. And we're talking about doing something that's citywide. I mean, St. Elizabeth's is, anybody who walked in old St. Elizabeth's Church right now would say, wow, there's a ton of work that needs to be done in here. They put new boilers in, they did those, but it's still a thriving community of faith. So, that's, if you were coming to me saying Benchmark Wealth Management wants to go in there and they need this change, that would be a different situation. But we're talking about changing how this is for all throughout our whole community.
I think one of the safeguards we have on this, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but this only allows them to go into the BZA and make a request for an alternative use. Is that correct?
Correct. So we were discussing how to approach it. So right now, if a person was looking to utilize Section 115141 as is, they go to the BZA, and various options are being discussed. I think at the end of the day, that's probably at least the best method to ensure that the city and the immediate neighborhood has some say in terms of what happens.
So the default is the underlying
Correct.
zone, and then BZA would be able to allow the item specified in here on section B in addition. On
Correct.
a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, commercial, but it's something where it doesn't recognize, let's say, adaptive reuse for corner lots that are institutional in nature, which is this is the case.
Okay.
So that's how it's being drafted, but at least, just finishing off, one of the thoughts I had, again, I think maybe it wasn't so good, it was maybe more aggressive, saying, well, let's make it a qualified use, where if you do X, Y, and Z, you can do it without the BZA. So that was at least discussed, probably a little bit too aggressive in terms of doing that. So, but one other thing I just want to say, since we're getting into the meat of it, with this particular property, both myself, Mark Reeves, looked at it to assist the current property owner, and for the sake of transparency, even myself looking at to buy the property, because it's a great property in the sense of having a pretty decent building of that size with off-street parking. So I decided not to proceed just with the amount of work that would be required. And obviously kind of with the zoning, et cetera. But to me, it's the nice thing with this property, it has certain positive attributes, but then it has the aspect of it was going to be continued use for a church. It's a lot of improvements that are necessary for that. So, but anyways, I think at this point it was more just to provide a trial balloon, maybe to see if you guys would be interested. And again, endorsing, and then we could staff work with it further, work with the planning commission to, massage the language if there is some interest. So.
I think it would be useful to have a tool that a company like this could use potentially if it needed to. And at this point, the company couldn't, with the current zoning code, the company couldn't possibly move in there. Would you agree with that?
Correct. Like they would have to seek a special rezoning or something.
So they don't fall under the corner lot provision?
Not at this point,
Okay.
because they're not a corner lot that was originally designed for commercial use.
Churches are considered commercial use.
I think for the building code.
Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, it just had some unique traits to it. So I think, as Mr. Gary explained to me when he came with this, it was like, this is what they were looking at. I believe it's 100% office that they would like, right? As opposed to,
As far as I know,
Yeah.
I did not do the walkthrough, but I did try to put together something that made sense if we wanted to provide them a tool to develop that site.
They wanted to have office space in the sanctuary, and then down below, they want to have community meeting spaces that they could offer to the schools or to community groups to use.
but there won't be any residential then.
No residential in there. I don't know how you put residential in there.
And that's probably part of the corner lot provision.
Mr. Mayor, do you have a comment?
Well, what is it exactly, Mr. Gary, that you're looking for the planning commission to do? I mean, we can endorse and move this to city council for a public, what is it that you expected or would like to see completed through the planning commission?
If I could wave my magic wand, the planning commission would look at this and endorse it in some form and move it on to council.
For a public hearing,
For a public hearing.
and council's, I think I understand what you're trying to accomplish.
All right. I think I'd recommend that we pass comments on to Mr. Skelly, who can work in conjunction with Mr. Gary to see if this is something the commission would like to move forward at our next meeting. And he can make any modifications to that, and we can have further discussion on it at that time.
So let's add another month to it. Is that acceptable? I mean, is that,
Well,
that's not...
it's not fair for me to dump this off at the beginning of a meeting and expect, immediate response from the planning commission and.
Well, but the thing that I feel is, we're not the final say on this.
I understand.
All we are doing is looking, it sounds like It sounds like one commissioner actually knows how she would proceed on this, I think. I have no problem moving it forward to city council. So let's do a public hearing on it. Let's put all the notifications out. Let's have some discussion. Us just adding another month to it is, okay, we add another month and then we all say, okay, yeah, let's move it to city council, and that's another month in the public hearing. So why wouldn't, if the motion was made by someone to move this, to endorse this change and move it to a public hearing for city council, I would probably second that motion.
I would think that would be, it seems to me the quicker we can put tools in place, the better for the city overall.
I concur. We can, I'm sorry, I'm sort of talking over.
Would somebody like to make that motion?
What? Go ahead.
Question on that.
Yes?
We just had a case come before us 2 months ago where the church down on Floral was asking to be rezoned for commercial use, if I remember right. So with this in place, they wouldn't even had to come before us. They'd go straight to the BZA about changing it to office use or whatever else they wanted within the 3 through 14?
Yeah, to me, in that case, it was a kind of different kettle of fish. They wanted ultimately more of a rec building as part of their operation. So it wasn't that they were changing into a commercial use or a mixed use or like a redevelopment. They wanted to expand, they wanted to stay and locate, but they needed some additional relief for the use, for the performance standards, the setbacks, all those type of things. So the office zone, I believe, provided a little bit more flexibility in that case.
And it was multiple parcels,
Yes.
With multiple zonings.
not one single parcel, it's multiples.
Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion on the subject?
I would like to make a motion to endorse.
I'm sorry, so you can't send anything to council because you haven't had a public hearing on it.
How should it be worded?
Make a motion to set a public hearing.
Okay, make a motion to set a public hearing for the suggested changes to 1151.41
At our next meeting.
next meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
No, I mean, yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney.
Yes.
Just seeing if you were listening.
I'm listening.
Okay, moving on to old business. Any items of old business? Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Do we need to make a motion to excuse the absent member?
We should. Thank you.
Sorry.
Would anybody like to make a motion to excuse our absent member?
I would like to make a motion to excuse the absent member.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger.
Yes.
Mr. Hockney.
Yes.
Now I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I'll make the motion we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes. Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney.
Yes. We are adjourned at 4:04. Thank you, everyone.
You need to hire you for next time. I think it's